The era of big government is over.
Remember that 18 years ago, then President Clinton declaring that big government was dead going into his second term. He said it as Washington was in a massive reform of welfare. Well, now, with President Obama getting ready for his second term State of the Union address, we're just finding out welfare is going the other way. A record 1 in 5 households are now on food stamps, and a whopping 100 million Americans are receiving some sort of food assistance. So how did we get derailed from ending welfare as we know it? And how do we get back on track? Hi, everybody. I'm David Asman. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with Mr. Steve Forbes, Rich Karlgaard, Elizabeth McDonald, John Tamny, Rick Unger, and Mike Ozanian. John Tamny, how do we get back on track?
Well, I think it's important to cut welfare benefits, and not out of cruelty, but out of compassion. I mean, there's nothing more life-affirming than having a job, but if you know that the federal government is going to send you a check either way, there's less urgency on a rainy day or a bad day to go out and find a job or adjust your wage demands to new realities. And so ultimately, welfare serves as a work deterrent, and it's anti-economic growth after that.
Well, and Emac, the point is, after the reforms in the Clinton era, the Republican and Democratic reforms, we had a massive decrease in the number of welfare applicants. Welfare caseloads plunged from 12 million in 96 to 5.9 million. More than half. Yeah. So it really had a good effect, and we're going in the opposite direction now.
I hear you. Listen, I don't like what the administration is doing in terms of all these Band-Aids, because it's their jobs policy and their economic policies that are really a check on job growth in the United States. But listen, I would say don't cut food stamps. What about that single mom with the child? She needs those food stamps, and food stamps have helped drop the poverty rate since 1967, and the CBO confirmed that. Academic studies have confirmed that. I would say cut things like ethanol subsidies and the $200 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse and duplication in the U.S. government, and then the fraud in food stamp program itself.
But, Rich, just take out the welfare mothers for a second. Talk about able-bodied single men without any dependents. That number has increased dramatically, doubled since 2008. So even there, I mean, if we were just to focus on that alone, we'd be getting somewhere, right?
Yeah, I think it's tragic. But the thing is, we have 7.5% unemployment, and employers are feeling very cautious. And this is what's tragic about this environment. The economy is not producing the kinds of jobs that it normally does. We will be nearly 5 years since the recession ended, and we still have these abysmal figures. Economic growth should be at 4%. It's at 2.5% or 3%. That makes a huge difference. I would concentrate on pro-growth policies that get unemployment down to 5%, then look at welfare reform.
But, Rick, we're supposed to be in this recovery right now. Isn't now the time when we could do something like that, get back to those Clinton-era reforms?
Well, I think we'd like to, but I got to tell you, I'm not going to be as much fun today because I actually agreed with almost everything Lizzie said. So I apologize, we can't fight. But I will pick on John
We're like
Tamny.
an old married couple anyway.
There are other people to fight with. Go ahead, Rick.
I will pick on John Tamny because John's suggesting that people are just sitting back and taking the money and not going for jobs completely ignores the fact that so much of the food stamp budget is going to people who do have a job and can't earn enough money to feed their families, even going to work. What about that?
All right. Well, he'll have a chance to respond. But Mike Ozanian, I want you to come in. Americans don't have any problem helping people who are down, but they don't want welfare to become a way of life. Yeah, and unfortunately, that's what worries a lot of people, right?
Right, David. And this started with President Obama's predecessor, George Bush. He doubled spending on food stamps. Under President Obama, it's increased 95%. You have to look at both of those presidents' spending because what we have is stagnant wages for the middle class. And also, we have the lowest labor participation rate we've had in 50 years. We have a percent of people participating either with a job or looking for a job that's normally at a recessionary level. So you need some incentives in the marketplace if you want a capitalistic economy.
Right. And incentives work, Steve Forbes, don't they? Isn't that the basis of capitalism?
It is indeed, David, and you're not going to get real food stamp reform or other welfare reform until you get this economy moving again, which means simplifying the tax code, reducing tax rates, stabilizing the dollar, getting rid of Obamacare and bringing in a market-oriented health care system and effective safety nets. Then you'd see this economy really take off.
But what about dependency? The idea that welfare does sort of sometimes stimulate a sense of dependency on the part of its recipients, and that's deadly.
It is, and this administration unfortunately likes that kind of thing, and the administration should be cracking down on abuse in food stamps, which apparently is widespread. But again, you're not going to get real reform. Most Americans would like to work. We don't have the European-style culture yet, but that's why we got to get this economy moving, or we'll sink into that kind of culture.
Okay, John Tamny must be like a pressure cooker. You had the pressure put on from Rick. Go ahead and respond.
You know, if you want to help the poor people, and I think we do, why would you foist the federal government on them? They're the least qualified at bringing people out of poverty.
What about
the problem right now is that there's too much government, and because there's too much government, the economy is not creating the jobs that would lure people back in the workforce. And so I think it's cruel what Rick's arguing for, because it creates a disincentive. If you're a jogger, you're less likely to run on a rainy day.
So, Rick, you're the cruel one.
Yeah, but that's not what I was talking about the working poor, John. You kind of were pushing the argument in another direction. I'm addressing the working poor, the people who work in the fast food restaurants, the people who are working at these large big box retailers who can't get paid enough money, even going to work, to take care of their family adequately. That's what I'm talking about. And it's a large, I'm not saying it's the entire budget, obviously, of the food stamp program, but it is a large chunk of it.
Well, Rick's putting
let's
the cart before the horse. After Clinton cut welfare, the economy took off. Right. Bill Clinton's first 2 years were very slow economically speaking.
But there was
after he cut welfare spending and funds shifted more from the government to the private sector. John Tamny is absolutely right.
Well, wait.
That's when economic growth and wages took off, Rick.
Okay.
That's right.
I hear what you're saying, but there was also the housing bubble and the internet bubble percolating at that time. Listen, here's the thing, and here's a broad Zoom perspective you probably won't hear about in the State of the Union address coming Tuesday night. And that is, why is this economy creating MIC jobs, these low-paying jobs? That's the problem with income. That's the story behind income inequality that the president's going to hammer on Tuesday night. The low-paying jobs are replacing high-paying jobs in this economy, and that is a structural problem.
Okay, but Steve Forbes, let's go back to the Clinton era reforms, and it was Clinton era. It wasn't just Bill Clinton. He was brought there by a lot of Republicans who proposed this in the first place. There were very specific requirements, work requirements, and there were time limits put on welfare. Aren't those a good thing? Didn't that really change welfare, and aren't we going against that now?
It did change welfare. You saw it in New York City, where welfare was drastically reduced under Giuliani, went down another 20% under Mayor Bloomberg. And nationwide, it went down sharply. And again, on food stamps, the time to tighten up, David, is when people feel this economy is moving again. And that means tax reform, monetary reform, and health care reform.
And Rich Carlgard, the fact is that these reforms that they had 18 years ago focused specifically, they had 12 definitions of work. Those definitions have been so modified by the Obama administration.
Yeah, look, we all know the system can be gamed, and it is being gamed, and there's a lot of fraud in there. But start with the basic questions. You know, the largest employers in the United States have tremendous amounts of cash on their balance sheet, and yet they're not investing for growth. Why are they not doing that? They're afraid when they look into the future that there's so much economic uncertainty created by this government that they're not expanding. Therefore, we have unemployment at 7.5%. I agree with Steve. Let's concentrate on growth, get unemployment down to 5%, then trim back welfare.
Yeah,
All right, that's got to be the last word.